A few months ago, I spent a bit of time doing what we perceived was a good presentation of a solution to a data-oriented problem. A senior colleague who we're trying to impress was noticeably quiet for the greater part of the presentation. At the end of it, he asked ever so gently, "So, what are you solving for?" The gentle tone of his voice and the way he asked the question made an unforgettable impression on me. Attention to detail, perception of value. You see, I had assumed based on the prevailing corporate culture that there would be little interest in the detailed architecting and prerequisites of solutioning. We could make impact quickly by jumping straight to showing how we were going to solve the problem, correct? Incorrect. There is always an appetite for high-quality work and people know when they see it. Besides, every other discipline in the organization prides itself in profound attention to detail. This attention to detail is reflected in the day-to-day activities of other business units. Finance staff insist on several forms and approvals to disburse even meager funds. Legal departments require loads and loads of documentation to preserve the reputation of the organization in, for example, her relationship to vendors. Human resource persons go to great extents when recruiting new employees. Why should IT professionals think that it is okay to be as light as possible? What are we solving for? Recent digital transformation efforts in government. Remember GSM? M-Pesa? The emergence of mobile telephony in leading African countries back in the 2000s was an example of the opportunities we have to leapfrog development in the digital age. The rise of Kenya as one of the countries where mobile telephone made history is evidence of the power of technology to make even African countries stand out. Interestingly, Africa became the fastest-growing mobile economy in the world in 2021 according to the International Trade Center. Technology is an equalizer. Underdeveloped nations fast-forward their progress by adopting technology without going sequentially through all the known stages of development taken by their developed counterparts. In fact, in my view, some advanced countries adopted new technologies slower simply because existing technology works well. Technology companies may be turning to Africa as the market for new products because that is where the need is. In some cases, that is where the money is too. Quite a few of these technology companies target African government who are perceived to have needs bordering on digitalization and cybersecurity. Recent announcements by governments in West Africa indicate some purchases might be in the pipeline, though suspensions may have been announced. Is corruption the problem? Quite a few of the technology products being proposed to African governments are said to have capacity to checkmate corruption. Corruption is certainly a big problem in Africa, as in many other parts of the world. But we must ask ourselves, if we objectively do a big picture analysis of our most daunting problems, is corruption really number one? Don't be shocked yet. When I was in the bank, we prided ourselves in the capacity to checkmate money laundering with a very expensive tool that was designed to give visibility to movement of large amounts of money. One component of this tool was particularly focused on politically exposed persons, PEPs, aside suspicious patterns and so forth. Massive amounts of money were said to have moved across banks last year in a certain African country, movements from government accounts to personal accounts. Either the banks involved did not have the requisite technology or they were simply not using them. Will acquisition of new technology by government bodies to checkmate corruption do better than existing technology? Is security the problem? How much money do you need to secure the nation's coffers? How much money are you securing compared to the money spent on security? Is our problem that our people are mostly thieves or mostly poor? A very wise business architect once said, "You cannot change what you don't understand." Is it the case that the average Nigerian is poor and thus constrained to pursue ways and means in order to survive by either participating in or aiding and abetting the fraudulent transactions that are being perpetrated right before his eyes? Should we be fighting insecurity by apprehending criminals of reducing poverty? Alfred Onanagbogwe Phip, Fin, Fiaf, a forensic expert and criminal intelligence specialist, asserts that about 70 to 80% of the wealth of Nigerians is often traced to unverifiable sources. The audacity of Yahoo boys and the proliferation of scam organizations is traceable to the perception of young Africans that fraud is the fastest way forward. What is responsible for this ideology? Is technology the solution? I am probably not qualified to proffer solutions to the profound problems that bedevil African nations from my small cocoon of enterprise architecture and information technology. But what I do as part of my role is ask questions. I ask technical experts questions about the design decisions they make. I ask emerging entrepreneurs questions about the decisions they make regarding their business. We used to have an expression back in the day about performance tuning and technical troubleshooting. Technical bosses would warn us to avoid simply throwing hardware at the problem. In this case, we may be throwing technology at our problems. What are we solving for? Again, can we see the big picture? The culture of throwing technology at the problem is typical in both governments and organizations. Technology, these days, is easy to deploy. A consultant shows up at your doorstep and says something interesting: we can improve your turnaround time by 60%. And business leaders are elated. Just use the right words and have a fancy proof of concept, POC, before technology is deployed. The step skipped here might be why we have a suboptimal turnaround time in the first place. The preliminary steps in architecting and solutioning touch on understanding the problem, articulating the current state of affairs, documenting what the business/people really want, and so forth. We are trying to answer the question, what are you solving for? These preliminary steps may appear bureaucratic, non-agile, or unnecessary. But let us think about it deeply. How do we measure the impact of the technology we deploy if we do not articulate the metrics at the beginning? How do we know our solution is not excessive, a typical problem in industry? Are there alternative solutions? In dealing with emerging entrepreneurs, I often advocate the approach of solving simple problems with existing technology. The knee-jerk reaction of the typical techie to a business owner who needs to solve a problem is to offer to build a new app. Coding is exciting, and we typically want to be the one responsible for the solution. I think differently. The important thing is that the problem is solved, so if the solution already exists, use it. In looking at our nations holistically and stepping back to maybe the 5 whys or fishbone, we may discover that solving our problems does not require new technology as much as going to eastern Nigeria may not require brand new roads. An honest evaluation of our problems may reveal there are opportunities for reuse of existing technology, review of existing policies and process, and maybe some attention to the quality of our human resources. Buying new technology is not always the way to go. Do we have ulterior motives? We used to have another saying back in the day within technology. Because techies were typically operational by the design of their roles, they always needed work to do. Occasionally you would hear the claim that if we solved all our problems today, we would have nothing to do tomorrow. To me, it sounded like a little bit of mediocrity. Don't solve the problem so well that it doesn't break down soon. Are we cooking up new projects and buying new technology just to create work for technology professionals? Install this, install that, configure this, configure that, monitor this, monitor that, or are we intent on solving real problems? As an example, do we need to monitor the phone conversations of 200 million people, or should we focus on the fraction of government officials who really have capacity to do harm? Questions. Conclusion. Those who really need to read this article will probably not be the ones to read it. However, I do hope that those who have read it will find it useful in rethinking how we approach solutioning, whether at the micro level or at scale. Take a step back and ask the profound question, what am I solving for? Blindly copying solutions from other organizations or nations is not sufficient. We can reference what has worked before, but we must architect what will work for us. Throwing technology at our problems is not proven to have worked either in organizations or governments. Every solid solution to human problems must pay attention to all sides of the enterprise, people, process, technology. But first and foremost, we must be absolutely honest with ourselves regarding our motives. Do we really want to solve the problem?